In the summer of 587 or 586 BCE, the walls of Jerusalem finally failed. Babylonian soldiers poured into the city. Houses were burned. Officials were executed. Families were separated and marched into exile. And on the hill above the ruined streets, the Temple of Solomon, the center of Judah's religious world, was stripped of its treasures and set off on fire. The surviving accounts remember the pillars, the bronze basins, the lamps, the bowls, the censers, and the precious vessels carried away to Babylon. They describe metal being broken apart because some objects were too large to transport. They record the destruction of a kingdom with the cold precision of an inventory. But the most sacred object in the temple is never mentioned. Not as captured, not as destroyed, not as hidden. The Ark of the Covenant simply disappears. For centuries, it had stood at the center of Israel's story. It had traveled through the wilderness. It had crossed the Jordan. It had been carried into battle. Kings had danced before it. Priests had guarded it. According to the biblical narrative, it marked the place where the invisible presence of God met humanity. Then, at the moment when we would expect its fate to be recorded, the Ark vanishes into silence. Was it burned inside the temple? Was its gold torn away and melted by soldiers who never understood what they had found? Did priests hide it beneath Jerusalem before the Babylonians entered the city? Was it carried into the mountains by the prophet Jeremiah? Did it travel south, eventually reaching Ethiopia? Or is the answer more unsettling? That the Ark was never lost in a single dramatic moment, but gradually disappeared from history long before anyone realized it was gone. This is not merely a search for an ancient chest. It is an investigation into the border between history and sacred memory, between physical evidence and inherited belief, and between what ancient people chose to record and what they deliberately left unsaid. Because somewhere between the final days of Jerusalem and the first years of exile, the most powerful sacred object described in the Hebrew Bible passed out of the historical record. And almost 3,000 years later, no one can prove where it went. To understand why the disappearance matters, we must first remove the Ark from the world of cinema. Popular culture has turned it into an ancient weapon, a golden machine capable of destroying armies, emitting mysterious energy, or killing anyone who looks inside. Some modern theories have described it as an electrical capacitor, a radioactive device, a communication system, or a forgotten piece of advanced technology. There is no reliable archaeological evidence for any of those claims. The biblical Ark was presented primarily as a sacred ritual object. Its power came not from machinery but from meaning. It represented covenant, law, kingship, holiness, danger, and the presence of a God who could not be represented by an ordinary human statue. The book of Exodus gives unusually precise instructions for its construction. It was to be made from acacia wood, covered inside and outside with gold, and fitted with gold rings through which carrying poles would be inserted. Its dimensions were 2.5 cubits long, 1.5 cubits wide, and 1.5 cubits high. Depending on the length assigned to the ancient cubit, it may have been approximately the size of a large storage chest. A cover of pure gold rested on top. At either end stood a cherub, a winged sacred being. Their wings stretched over the cover, and their faces turned inward toward the space between them. That empty space was essential. The text does not say that God lived inside the box like a spirit imprisoned in a container. Instead, the divine voice was described as coming from above the cover, between the cherubim. Some scholars interpret this arrangement through the imagery of ancient Near Eastern thrones. The cherubim formed or guarded a symbolic throne, while the Ark served as its sacred foundation or footstool. In other words, the most important part of the Ark may have been the space that contained nothing visible at all. At the center of a world filled with statues of gods, Israelite tradition placed an empty throne. The invisible could not be carved, the divine could not be reduced to a face, and yet the covenant could be carried. According to Exodus, the stone tablets of the covenant were placed inside the Ark. Later traditions also associated it with a container of manna and the staff of Aaron, although the biblical texts do not present every detail in exactly the same way. When the Ark was installed in Solomon's temple, the Book of Kings specifically states that nothing was inside except the 2 stone tablets placed there at Horeb. This difference is important. The Ark was not remembered through one perfectly uniform description written at a single moment. Its story survives through texts composed, preserved, edited, and interpreted across generations. For believers, those texts form sacred scripture. For historians, they also preserve layers of cultural memory. Both perspectives can exist without being confused. The historian asks when a tradition was written, what earlier material it may contain, and how its language compares with other ancient cultures. The believer may ask what the tradition means and why it endured. The disappearance of the ark becomes difficult precisely because these questions overlap but do not always produce the same kind of answer. Within the biblical story, the ark first belongs to a people in motion. It has no permanent palace. It rests inside the tabernacle, a portable sanctuary carried during Israel's journey through the wilderness. The arrangement expresses a powerful idea. The divine presence is not confined to a mountain, a city, or a building. The sanctuary can be dismantled. The sacred object can move. God travels with the community, but mobility creates danger. The ark is not treated as ordinary property. Specific people are appointed to carry sacred objects. The poles allow the ark to be lifted without direct contact. Ritual boundaries separate it from those who have not been authorized to approach it. The message is repeated through the stories that follow. Holiness offers protection, but holiness is not safe. The ark appears at moments when borders collapse, between wilderness and homeland, defeat and victory, human authority and divine judgment. In the book of Joshua, priests carry it toward the Jordan River. The waters are said to stop while the people cross. At Jericho, the ark is carried during the ritual procession around the city. Yet the biblical narrative never allows the ark to become a simple magical device controlled by human hands. That lesson becomes brutally clear at a place called Ebenezer. Israel is at war with the Philistines. After suffering defeat, Israelite leaders decide to bring the ark from Shiloh into the military camp. Their reasoning sounds almost like a formula. Bring the sacred object, and it will save them. When the ark arrives, the army shouts so loudly that the earth seems to shake. The Philistines hear the noise and become afraid. They know the stories of Israel's God. They believe a terrible divine power has entered the camp, but the presence of the ark does not guarantee victory. The Israelites are defeated again. Thousands die. The sons of the priest Eli are killed, and the Philistines capture the ark. This moment destroys the idea that sacred power can be manipulated. The ark cannot be reduced to a lucky symbol. It does not serve the ambitions of corrupt priests or frightened commanders. The people carry it into battle, but they do not control what it represents. For the Israelites, the capture is a spiritual catastrophe. A child born during the crisis is named Ichabod, connected in the narrative with the declaration that glory has departed from Israel. For the Philistines, however, the captured ark becomes a trophy. They take it to Ashdod and place it in the temple of Dagon, one of their gods. The symbolism would have been understood throughout the ancient world. A captured sacred object demonstrated the triumph of one people and its deity over another, but the story reverses the victory. The image of Dagon is found fallen before the ark. It is raised and falls again, this time damaged. Affliction spreads through Philistine cities. Wherever the ark is taken, fear follows it. Finally, the Philistines return it. They place it on a cart drawn by cows and send it toward Israelite territory, with offerings intended to acknowledge the power they believe has struck them. Whether one reads this account as sacred history, theological narrative, cultural memory, or a combination of all three, its purpose is clear. The ark may be captured, but the God associated with it is not. The box does not need an army to rescue it. It returns without soldiers. That distinction will follow the ark throughout its story. Human beings repeatedly attempt to possess it, use it, move it, display it, or secure their legitimacy through it. But every attempt raises the same question. Does the ark belong to a nation, a priesthood, or a king? Or does it belong only to the covenant it represents? After its return, the ark remains for years at Kiriath Jearim. It is no longer constantly moving through battlefields. It waits at the edge of the political story until David establishes Jerusalem as his capital. David has united tribes and secured a city, but political control alone is not enough. Jerusalem must become more than a fortress. It must become a sacred center. Bringing the ark into the city would join royal authority with religious memory. The journey begins with celebration. Musicians play. David and the people dance. The ark is placed on a new cart. Then the animals stumble. A man named Uzzah reaches out and takes hold of the ark. He dies. The celebration stops instantly. David becomes angry and afraid. The ark is left temporarily at the house of Obededom. Only later, when reports of blessing emerge from that household, does David continue the journey. This time, the ark is carried with greater ritual care. David dances before it as it enters Jerusalem. The scene is often remembered as a triumph, but beneath the music lies a warning. Even the king cannot approach sacred power entirely on his own terms. David may bring the ark into his capital, but he does not domesticate it. The death of Uzzah remains one of the most disturbing episodes connected to the object. His action appears instinctive. The ark seems about to fall, and he tries to steady it. Why should such an act lead to death? The narrative does not offer a modern moral explanation. Instead, it communicates an ancient understanding of holiness as a force demanding boundaries. Good intentions do not erase ritual danger. The ark is not dangerous because it is evil. It is dangerous because the distance between ordinary life and sacred presence has been violated. For later audiences, the episode became an unforgettable warning. The ark could bless a house. It could terrify an enemy. It could accompany a people. But it could never become ordinary. David plans to build a permanent temple, but the task passes to his son Solomon. When Solomon completes the temple in Jerusalem, the ark reaches the destination toward which its entire journey seems to have been moving. Priests carry it into the inner sanctuary, the Holy of Holies. There it rests beneath the wings of enormous cherubim. The portable chest of the wilderness now stands at the center of a royal temple. The transformation is profound. The ark that once moved with a migrating people has become fixed within the capital of a kingdom. The sacred object is no longer simply connected to covenant and memory. It is also connected to dynasty, land, priesthood, and the political theology of Jerusalem. The temple becomes the place toward which worship is directed. The ark stands inside its most restricted chamber, hidden from ordinary sight. Only the high priest is associated with entering the Holy of Holies, and only under specific ritual conditions. Most people would never see the ark. They knew it through tradition. They imagined it beyond curtains and walls. Its invisibility increased its power. A sacred object repeatedly displayed becomes familiar. A sacred object hidden in darkness becomes an idea as much as an artifact. The ark's greatest period of importance may therefore have been the period in which almost no one could look at it. But this permanent home created a new vulnerability. A portable sanctuary can escape an invading army. A temple cannot. Jerusalem stood between empires. Egypt lay to the southwest. Mesopotamian powers rose to the northeast. Trade routes, military campaigns, alliances, and rebellions repeatedly pulled the small kingdoms of the Levant into conflicts far larger than themselves. During the reign of Solomon's son Rehoboam, an Egyptian ruler identified in the biblical text as Shishak invaded Judah and took treasures from the temple and royal palace. This invasion later inspired theories that the ark might have been carried into Egypt. It is an attractive possibility. Egypt has deserts, temples, tombs, and vast archaeological landscapes. A sacred object disappearing into an Egyptian treasury seems almost designed for legend. But the timeline creates a serious problem. The biblical narrative refers to the ark in periods after Shishak's campaign. Most notably, during the reign of King Josiah, the Second Book of Chronicles records an instruction to the Levites to place the Holy Ark in the house built by Solomon. If this passage reflects a genuine memory of the ark's presence in Josiah's time, then the Egyptian invasion centuries earlier cannot explain its final disappearance. But the verse from Josiah's reign creates a mystery of its own. Why did the king have to tell the Levites to place the ark in the temple? Had it been removed? Had it been moved during earlier periods of religious conflict? Was Josiah ordering a ceremonial restoration? Or does the verse preserve a clue that the ark was already being protected from an approaching disaster? Josiah ruled Judah in the late 7th century BCE, during an unstable transition in the ancient Near East. Assyria, which had dominated the region, was weakening. Egypt and Babylon were competing to shape what came next. According to the biblical account, Josiah carried out major religious reforms. The temple was repaired. A scroll identified as a book of law was discovered. Worship was centralized in Jerusalem, and practices considered illegitimate were suppressed. Within that context comes the strange command: Put the Holy Ark in the house Solomon built. You no longer need to carry it on your shoulders. The plain meaning might be simple. The Ark had been moved and was now being returned, but later Jewish tradition interpreted the passage differently. According to rabbinic texts, Josiah foresaw the destruction that would come upon the temple and ordered the Ark to be hidden. Later interpretations described a concealed chamber prepared beneath or within the temple complex, sometimes attributed to Solomon's foresight. In this tradition, the Ark never left Jerusalem. It was not carried into exile. It was buried beneath the sacred ground before the Babylonians arrived. The idea is powerful because it explains the silence in the Babylonian accounts. Invaders could not record what they never found. Priests protecting the Ark would have had every reason to keep its location secret, and a temple built with storage rooms, foundations, passages, and restricted chambers might have offered places where a sacred chest could be concealed. But this solution rests on tradition, not direct archaeological discovery. The verse in Chronicles does not explicitly say that Josiah hid the Ark. Rabbinic explanations were recorded centuries after the destruction, even if they may preserve older beliefs. They reveal how Jewish communities understood the disappearance, but they do not provide a map. The hidden chamber theory therefore stands in a difficult position. It is not an invention of modern treasure hunters. It is rooted in serious religious tradition. Yet it remains physically unverified. And verification beneath the Temple Mount is almost impossible. The area is among the most sacred and politically sensitive places on earth. It is revered in Judaism as the location of the ancient temples and in Islam as the Haram al-Sharif, the noble sanctuary containing the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque. The site has been built, destroyed, expanded, repaired, transformed by successive civilizations. Herodian construction dramatically reshaped the platform. Roman, Byzantine, Islamic, Crusader, Mamluk, Ottoman, Jordanian, and modern history all left their marks. Archaeology in Jerusalem is never only archaeology. Every stone can carry religious meaning, national claims, political tension, and memories of conflict. Excavation beneath the sanctuary could threaten structures, violate sacred boundaries, or ignite violence. As a result, the kind of systematic archaeological investigation that might test stories of hidden First Temple chambers has not been possible. The absence of discovery proves nothing, but it also confirms nothing. Somewhere beneath later construction there may be previously unknown cavities. Yet, even if a chamber were identified, connecting it to Josiah or to the Ark would require evidence far stronger than an empty room. A chest found without a secure archaeological context could be medieval, Roman, or modern. Gold decoration would not be enough. Cherubim would not necessarily be enough. To identify the Ark of the Covenant, investigators would need an extraordinary chain of evidence. Datable materials, inscriptions, context, construction techniques, and ideally a connection to the late Iron Age temple. The object would have to survive not only the ground but the demands of proof. That is a far greater challenge than simply finding a box. If the Ark was not hidden beneath Jerusalem, the most direct possibility is also the darkest. It was destroyed. The Babylonian army did not enter Jerusalem as a team of museum conservators. Ancient imperial conquest involved killing, burning, dismantling, looting, and the public humiliation of defeated gods and kings. Temple treasures had economic value. Gold and silver could be removed, weighed, melted, redistributed, or dedicated in another sanctuary. Bronze could be broken into transportable pieces. Wood could burn. If Babylonian soldiers found a gold-covered wooden chest, they might have stripped away its precious metal and destroyed the core. To them, the difference between the Ark and another piece of temple furniture may not have mattered. The object's significance to Judah did not guarantee its preservation. In fact, its significance might have made its destruction more likely. The biblical accounts say the temple was burned and sacred vessels were taken away. Archaeology elsewhere in Jerusalem has revealed evidence consistent with the Babylonian destruction, including burned structures, weapons, collapsed buildings, and objects abandoned during the catastrophe. The destruction theory requires no secret tunnel, unknown migration, or hidden guardian. It follows the normal pattern of ancient conquest. And yet one detail continues to resist it. The lists, the Book of Kings and the Book of Jeremiah preserve extensive descriptions of temple objects taken by the Babylonians. They mention bronze pillars, bases, a sea, pots, shovels, wick trimmers, dishes, incense bowls, and objects made of gold and silver. Why list so many items but not the ark? Perhaps the answer is simple. The lists were never meant to include everything. Ancient inventories can be selective. The ark may have been destroyed before officials counted the loot. It may have been treated separately. The account may have focused on objects associated with temple service rather than the inner sanctuary. Or the ark may already have been gone. Silence is not proof of survival. But in this case, silence is the reason the mystery exists. Had the text said that the ark burned, the search would have ended. Had it said that Nebuzaradan carried the ark to Babylon, historians would at least have a final direction. Instead, the record moves around the object as if describing the contents of a room while refusing to mention what once stood at its center. After the exile, some temple vessels returned to Jerusalem. The Persian king Cyrus allowed Judean exiles to rebuild their sanctuary. The Book of Ezra describes sacred objects being counted and transported back. Again, there is no ark. The second temple was built, but ancient Jewish tradition did not describe the restored sanctuary as possessing the original ark. The Holy of Holies remained sacred, but the chest associated with the covenant was absent. This creates a transformation that is easy to overlook. Judaism survived the loss of the ark. It survived the destruction of the temple, exile, foreign rule, and the disappearance of the sacred object once connected with the divine throne. The covenant was no longer carried in a gold-covered chest. It was carried in texts, practices, memory, law, prayer, and community. The disappearance may therefore have created a theological crisis, but it did not destroy the tradition. Something changed. The object that had once stood at the center of worship became less important than the teachings it represented. This change may explain one of the most surprising biblical statements about the ark. In the book of Jeremiah, the prophet imagines a future in which people will no longer speak of the Ark of the Covenant. They will not remember it, miss it, or make another one. Jerusalem itself will be called the throne of God. The passage does not sound like a treasure map. It sounds like a world moving beyond the need for the object. That raises an uncomfortable possibility. What if the people closest to the Ark's disappearance did not expect it to return? What if the Ark's absence was gradually absorbed into a new understanding of sacred presence? Later generations searched for the chest, but prophetic tradition could imagine a future in which it was as unnecessary. Another ancient text offers a dramatically different answer. The second book of Maccabees, written centuries after the Babylonian destruction, preserves a story about the prophet Jeremiah. According to this account, Jeremiah received a divine command before the fall of Jerusalem. He took the tabernacle, the altar of incense, and the ark to the mountain from which Moses had once viewed the promised land. This is generally understood as the region of Mount Nebo, east of the Jordan River. Jeremiah found a cave, placed the sacred objects inside, and sealed the entrance. Some of his companions tried to mark the path, but later could not find it. When Jeremiah learned what they had done, he told them that the place must remain unknown until God gathered the people again and showed mercy. The story explains not only where the ark went, but why no one can find it. Its disappearance is intentional. Its location has been protected by divine will. The ark will not be recovered through ordinary ambition. It will return only at the proper moment in sacred history. For treasure hunters, the Mount Nebo tradition appears to offer a geographic clue. For historians, it presents immediate problems. Second Maccabees was written long after Jeremiah's lifetime. The author refers to earlier documents, but those sources have not survived independently. No archaeological evidence has connected a cave near Mount Nebo with the ark, and the story's language is theological. The hidden objects will remain concealed until a future restoration. The inability of Jeremiah's followers to find the cave may be less a navigational detail than a declaration that the sacred cannot be recovered before its appointed time. Still, the tradition cannot be dismissed as meaningless. It demonstrates that by the Hellenistic period, Jewish communities were actively explaining the ark's disappearance. They did not all assume it had been destroyed. Some believed it had been deliberately preserved beyond the reach of empire. The story also places Jeremiah in a role larger than that of prophet. He becomes the guardian of Israel's sacred memory. As Jerusalem falls, he saves not the palace, the throne, or the king's treasury, but the symbols of covenant and worship. The ark does not escape because Judah is militarily strong. It escapes because one person understands what must be protected before the disaster begins. But if Jeremiah hid the ark on Mount Nebo, why did no later ruler retrieve it? Why did the builders of the Second Temple not search for it? Why does no early record describe an organized expedition? The tradition answers, because the location was meant to remain unknown. The historian must answer differently, because we lack evidence that the event happened. The distance between those two answers is the distance between faith and historical method. Faith may regard concealment as part of the miracle. Historical investigation treats concealment as a claim that cannot be tested. Neither side can force the other to use the same standard. The mystery survives between them. Far to the south of Jerusalem, another tradition does not say that the ark is lost at all. It says the ark is in Ethiopia. In the northern city of Axum stands the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion, one of the most important sacred sites of Ethiopian Orthodox Christianity. Within the church complex is a chapel traditionally said to contain the original Ark of the Covenant. The object is not placed on public display. It is not photographed. It is not opened for scientific examination. According to the tradition, it is guarded by a single monk, appointed to remain near it for life. Outsiders do not enter and inspect the relic. To skeptics, the refusal of examination appears to weaken the claim. To believers, examination would violate the very holiness that makes the object sacred. This creates a perfect circle. The ark cannot be authenticated because it cannot be examined, and it cannot be examined because it is believed to be the ark. The tradition is connected with the story of the Queen of Sheba and King Solomon. In the Ethiopian national and religious epic known as the Kebra Nagast, the queen, called Makeda, travels to Jerusalem and has a son by Solomon. That son, Menelik, later journeys to meet his father. When Menelik returns to Ethiopia, the ark comes with him. In some versions, it is taken without Solomon's knowledge. In others, the transfer unfolds according to divine purpose. The covenant moves from Jerusalem to a new sacred geography. For Ethiopia, this is not simply an adventure story about a stolen treasure. It is connected with kingship, identity, liturgy, and the belief that Ethiopia entered a special covenantal relationship with God. The ark tradition became woven into the religious imagination of a civilization. That cultural fact is undeniable even when the object's physical identity remains unproven. The date of the surviving Kebra Nagas text, however, is much later than the age of Solomon. It reflects older materials and traditions, but historians cannot treat it as a contemporary report of a 10th century BCE transfer. There is also a direct chronological conflict with the biblical narrative. If the original ark left Jerusalem during Solomon's lifetime, what ark appears in later accounts involving the temple and King Josiah? One solution is that later Jerusalem traditions referred to a replica. Another is that the Ethiopian account expresses theological legitimacy rather than a literal chain of custody. A third is that one tradition preserves the truth and the other does not. But none of these solutions has been demonstrated archaeologically. The Ethiopian relationship with the ark extends far beyond the chapel at Axum. Every Ethiopian Orthodox church is centered on a sacred tablet known as a tabot. The tabot represents the tablets of the law and the ark's mercy seat. It sanctifies the church and is treated with extraordinary reverence. During major celebrations, tabots may be carried in procession while covered in cloth, hidden from ordinary view. The symbolism is striking. The ark is simultaneously one object and many. The original is believed to rest in Axum, but its sacred pattern is present throughout the religious life of the church. A building without its tabot cannot fully function as a consecrated church. This tradition is so serious that Ethiopian tablets held by British institutions have not been treated like ordinary museum objects. Some remain hidden from public display because of their religious status, and debates over their return have become part of a larger discussion about colonial-era looting and sacred property. Whatever rests in the Axum Chapel, the ark is not merely an archaeological question in Ethiopia. It is a living religious reality. Could scientific examination settle the matter? Perhaps less easily than it appears. Suppose authorities permitted a team to enter the chapel. Suppose the object were photographed, measured, and sampled. What result would prove it was the biblical ark? Wood might be radiocarbon dated, but ancient wood can be reused in later objects. Gold cannot be dated in the same way. Construction methods could indicate a region and period, but restoration over centuries might complicate the answer. An inscription could help, but ancient inscriptions can be forged, added, or misinterpreted. Even a date near the Late Bronze or Iron Age would not automatically identify the object. The ancient Near East contained many sacred chests, portable shrines, thrones, and ritual objects. The biblical ark did not exist in a cultural vacuum. To establish authenticity, researchers would need provenance, a continuous, reliable history connecting the object to ancient Jerusalem. That is precisely what is missing. The Ethiopian tradition provides sacred continuity, but not a chain of documentation satisfying modern archaeology. And scientific intrusion might damage not only an artifact but a relationship of trust with a religious community. An investigation can become a form of disrespect when it assumes that everything sacred must be surrendered to outsiders for verification. But the opposite problem also remains. A claim protected permanently from examination cannot become archaeological fact. It can remain a revered belief. It can shape civilizations. It can be treated with dignity. But historical investigation must preserve the word unverified. That word does not mean false. It means the available evidence cannot decide. Between Jerusalem, Mount Nebo, Babylon, and Axum, the trail begins to fragment. Every destination offers something the others lack. Babylon offers historical probability. Conquering armies took sacred treasures, and the temple was destroyed. Jerusalem offers continuity. Priestly knowledge, hidden chambers, and later Jewish tradition could explain why the ark never appeared among the spoils. Mount Nebo offers an ancient written account of deliberate concealment. Ethiopia offers a living community that believes the ark never vanished. But every theory also contains a weakness. Babylon has no ark in its surviving inventory. Jerusalem has no accessible chamber containing the object. Mount Nebo has no confirmed cave. Axum has no public examination. The mystery persists because no theory possesses both a compelling story and decisive physical evidence. There is another possibility, rarely as exciting as hidden caverns or guarded chapels. The ark may have disappeared gradually. The final centuries of the Kingdom of Judah were marked by religious reforms, political struggles, invasions, and changes within the temple. Sacred objects could be moved during renovations, hidden during emergencies, replaced after damage, or reinterpreted over time. Perhaps the original ark had been lost, destroyed, or removed before the Babylonian siege. Temple authorities may have avoided publicly admitting the loss. A replacement might have existed. The ark might have remained symbolically important even after the physical object was no longer central to ritual life. By the time Babylon's army arrived, the chest remembered from earlier tradition may already have become more memory than artifact. This would explain why there is no dramatic record of its capture. There was no single final scene. No priest ran into the smoke carrying it. No soldier opened it. No secret caravan crossed the desert. The ark simply passed out of use, while stories continued to preserve its earlier importance. This theory is difficult to prove because gradual disappearance leaves few traces. History prefers events with dates. Objects are built, stolen, burned, buried, and discovered, but cultural transitions often happen quietly. A ritual changes. A room is reorganized. A generation dies. Knowledge, once considered obvious, is no longer transmitted. Then decades later, people realize that something has vanished. The biblical texts themselves may preserve signs of this changing world. In early narratives, the ark moves openly through the landscape. It leads processions, enters battles, and travels between settlements. In Solomon's temple, it becomes hidden behind architecture and priestly restriction. In later prophetic imagination, the covenant no longer depends on the object. After the exile, religious life continues without it. The ark's story may therefore be the story of an object becoming an idea. First, it is carried by people, then it is concealed in a sanctuary. Finally, it is carried only in memory. Some modern investigators have gone further, questioning whether the ark described across biblical literature was always understood as one continuous physical object. Historical critical scholars study differences in vocabulary, theology, and narrative style. Some passages emphasize the ark as a container for covenant tablets. Others emphasize it as a throne, military palladium, symbol of divine presence, or ritual center. These roles may reflect different traditions that were eventually woven together. This does not automatically mean that no historical ark existed. Ancient communities often preserved memories of real objects while interpreting them differently across time. A royal throne can also be a political symbol. A flag can be fabric, national identity, military standard, and sacred memory at once. The ark could have been a real cultic chest whose meaning expanded as Israelite religion developed. But historians must acknowledge a limitation. No artifact has been excavated from a secure archaeological context and identified through inscription or documentation as the Ark of the Covenant. We possess texts. We possess comparable ancient imagery. We possess religious traditions. We possess archaeological evidence for destruction layers in temples, kingdoms, and cultural practices. But the Ark itself remains outside the verified material record. This is why claims of technological explanations are so weak. Before asking how the Ark supposedly generated electricity, emitted radiation, or functioned as a machine, we would first need the object. We would need its materials. We would need physical measurements beyond literary description. We would need evidence of components, residues, wiring, chemical exposure, or mechanical design. None of that exists. The technological ark is not an archaeological conclusion. It is a modern fantasy placed inside an ancient text. The biblical narratives describe ritual danger and divine judgment, not engineering instructions. Trying to convert every mystery into lost technology can prevent us from understanding how ancient people actually thought. They did not need electricity to experience sacred terror. They lived in a world in which temples, oaths, purity, sacrifice, kingship, and divine presence shaped reality. To them, the ark was powerful because the covenant was powerful. The chest did not have to be a machine. It stood at the point where law, memory, community, and the invisible met, and that may be why its disappearance still affects us. A machine can be reconstructed from diagrams. A symbol cannot be recreated so easily. According to Exodus, the gold, wood, cherubim, rings, and poles could theoretically be reproduced. The dimensions are given. Craftspeople could build a convincing replica. But a replica would not possess the original history. It would not have crossed the wilderness. It would not have stood at Shiloh. It would not have been captured by the Philistines. It would not have entered Jerusalem with David or rested in Solomon's temple. The ark's identity depends on continuity. Without continuity, a chest is only a chest. This is why the search is ultimately a search for provenance, the unbroken path between object and story. Every proposed ark fails at that point. A chest beneath Jerusalem would need to be connected with the first temple. An object on Mount Nebo would need evidence linking it to the age of Jeremiah. The relic in Axum would need a traceable route from Jerusalem to Ethiopia. A museum object would need excavation records and documentation. Without that chain, belief may remain, but identification remains uncertain. The ark also disappeared into a world where almost every institution capable of preserving its history was destroyed. Jerusalem's government collapsed, its temple burned, its priesthood was disrupted, its population was killed, displaced, or exiled. Archives may have been destroyed along with buildings. Oral knowledge may have died with the people entrusted to protect it. We often imagine that an object as important as the ark could never vanish without a record. History shows the opposite. The more violent the collapse, the more likely records are lost. Cities disappear. Royal tombs are robbed. Languages become unreadable. Monuments are dismantled and used as building stone. Sacred objects are melted because their material value survives after their meaning is forgotten. The ancient world was not designed to preserve evidence for future investigators. The survival of anything is the exception. Perhaps the ark was destroyed and no witness lived to describe it. Perhaps the people who hid it were executed before revealing the location. Perhaps the priests who knew the secret died in Babylon. Perhaps the story was intentionally suppressed so that conquerors could never recover it. Each possibility is plausible, none is provable, and the more possibilities we create, the easier it becomes to mistake imagination for evidence. A responsible investigation must resist that temptation. It must not declare the Ethiopian ark authentic simply because the tradition is moving. It must not declare the Jerusalem chamber real simply because rabbinic sources describe concealment. It must not declare Jeremiah's cave historical simply because 2nd Maccabees preserves the story. It must not declare the ark destroyed simply because destruction is statistically likely. Probability is not certainty. Tradition is not excavation. Silence is not proof, but uncertainty is not permission to say anything. The strongest conclusion is narrower than many people want. The ark is described in ancient Israelite sacred literature as a central object associated with covenant and divine presence. The biblical narrative places it in Solomon's temple and later refers to it during Josiah's reign. Jerusalem and the temple were destroyed by Babylon in the early 6th century BCE. Accounts of the destruction mention many sacred objects but do not clearly state what happened to the ark. Later Jewish and Christian traditions proposed concealment in Jerusalem or near Mount Nebo. Ethiopian Orthodox tradition maintains that the ark reached Ethiopia and remains at Axum. None of these proposed locations has produced publicly verifiable archaeological evidence, accepted as the original ark. Beyond that point, certainty ends. But perhaps the lack of certainty is not a failure. The mystery reveals something about the human need for physical connection. Religions speak of invisible realities: God, covenant, holiness, mercy, judgment, destiny. Human beings struggle to relate to what cannot be touched, so we create places, rituals, texts, vessels, images, and objects. We give memory a physical form. The ark was one of the most powerful examples of that impulse. Inside it rested the law. Above it stood an empty throne. Around it gathered a people. Its design brought together visibility and invisibility. The chest could be seen, but what it represented could not. The gold could reflect light, but the divine presence remained without an image. Its disappearance intensified that paradox. The ark became more visible in imagination after it became invisible in history. Artists reconstructed it. Writers relocated it. Explorers searched for it. Governments were accused of hiding it. Churches claimed to guard it. Films turned it into a weapon. Each generation created the ark it wanted to find. For some, it is proof that the biblical narrative is historically true. For others, it is treasure. For others, it is national inheritance. For others, it is evidence of lost technology. For others, it is a symbol of a covenant that needs no surviving object. The search often tells us more about the searcher than about the ark. A treasure hunter looks for gold. A government looks for legitimacy. An archaeologist looks for context. A believer looks for presence. A skeptic looks for contradiction. The same missing object becomes a mirror. And this may explain why no ordinary discovery could satisfy everyone. Imagine that tomorrow a chamber is opened beneath Jerusalem. Inside stands a wooden chest covered with gold. Some would immediately declare the mystery solved. Others would question the dating. Some would demand that the chest be opened. Others would forbid anyone from touching it. Jerusalem, Jordan, Ethiopia, religious authorities, museums, and governments might all face competing claims. Who would own it? Could any nation own an object sacred to billions? Would it belong to Judaism because of its covenantal origin? Would Christian communities claim a place in its history? Would Ethiopia challenge its removal based on its own sacred tradition? Would it become a museum artifact, a functioning religious object, or a political symbol? Would scientists be allowed to cut a sample from its wood? Would cameras enter the chamber? Would the tablets be removed? The discovery might not end conflict. It might create a new one. And there is a deeper question. What would happen if the chest were opened and found empty? The Book of Kings already says that, in Solomon's time, it contained only the tablets. Those tablets could have decayed, shattered, been removed, or never survived. Would an empty ark be less sacred? Or would the emptiness reflect the same idea expressed by the space between the cherubim, that the divine was never contained by the object? What if the ark were found and proved to be a later replica? Would that destroy the traditions built around it? Probably not. Religious meaning does not always depend on laboratory authentication. A replica carried through centuries of prayer can become historically sacred in its own right, even if it is not the object described in Exodus. And what if the original ark was conclusively shown to have been by the Babylonians? Would the covenant have burned with it? History suggests otherwise. The tradition survived, the law survived, the people survived. The idea carried by the ark proved more durable than acacia wood or gold. That may be the final clue. The Ark disappeared at the moment when the community was forced to learn that sacred identity could no longer depend on one city, one king, one temple, or one object. In exile, the covenant had to travel without carrying poles. It had to live in language. It had to survive in memory. It had to cross borders inside people. The physical ark may have been lost, but the civilization formed around its meaning continued. Perhaps that is why the mystery remains unresolved in the texts. A clear ending would close the object's story. Silence allowed the ark to remain suspended between destruction and return. For those who believe it was hidden, it waits. For those who believe it was taken, it may still be recovered. For those who believe it was destroyed, its absence proves the resilience of faith without relics. For those who approach it historically, it remains an unsolved problem shaped by incomplete sources and inaccessible ground. Every answer produces another question. If Babylon destroyed it, why was its destruction not celebrated or recorded? If priests hid it, why did the secret never securely pass to later generations? If Jeremiah carried it to Mount Nebo, why has no trace emerged? If Menelekli took it to Ethiopia, how do we explain the ark's later appearance in Jerusalem's traditions? If the object disappeared gradually, when did memory replace material reality? And if it still exists, would finding it reveal the truth, or merely begin a new struggle over who has the right to define that truth? For now, the trail ends where it began. Jerusalem burns, the temple collapses. Soldiers carry gold, silver, and bronze through the ruined gates. Scribes remember the vessels. Exiles remember the city. But no witness tells us what happened inside the Holy of Holies. Perhaps the chamber was already empty. Perhaps the ark was beneath their feet. Perhaps it was moving through darkness toward a destination no record would preserve. Or perhaps its gold was already melting in a Babylonian fire. We do not know. That uncertainty has survived longer than the kingdom that created it, longer than Babylon, longer than the first and second temples, and longer than almost every empire that ruled Jerusalem afterward. The Ark of the Covenant remains history's most famous empty space. Not only because an object is missing, but because its disappearance forces us to confront a question that reaches far beyond archaeology. When the physical symbols of belief are destroyed, what remains? Is faith weakened when its sacred objects vanish? Or does belief become stronger when it can no longer depend on something that can be captured, hidden, or burned? Perhaps the greatest power of the Ark was never the power to defeat armies. Perhaps it was the power to carry an idea across generations. And perhaps its final journey did not lead beneath Jerusalem, into a cave near Mount Nebo, through the gates of Babylon, or inside a chapel in Axum. Perhaps its final journey was into human memory. Where do you believe the Ark of the Covenant went? Was it destroyed during the fall of Jerusalem, hidden by priests before the invasion, carried away to another land, or preserved somewhere that remains beyond the reach of modern investigation? Share your interpretation in the comments, and subscribe to The Last Belief, where we continue to investigate the mysteries of history, religion, culture, lost civilizations, sacred traditions, and the greatest unanswered questions of the human story. Because sometimes what disappeared from history can reveal more about humanity than what survived.